Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sanibel Public Library this morning. My name is Duane Shaffer. I'm head of collection development for the library and your host for these ongoing World War II programs. Now, if you're a little confused about this picture behind me, I'm going to explain that to you later. Is that an American Jeep right there? Yes. Are those German soldiers in the Jeep? Yes. Is that an American tank? No. It is not. Is that a German commander in the tank? Yes. I'll explain all that later. But for now, I've got a program note for you real quick. Our next and last program for the season is going to be April 1st, and that is going to be Operation Argument, or what we call Big Week. I know we were supposed to do that January 20th, but we were postponed, and we will do that. And if you're in the library looking for World War II programs, you're going to go to the 940.54 section. That is where you will find those. As always, in the midst of this program, you're going to find a pop quiz. Now, I originally constructed this program way back in late summer, early fall, when we still thought we were going to be doing in-person programs. There is an interactive part of that pop quiz, but I'm going to trust you to be honest, and you're going to play at home. And I'm not going to use Danny as a volunteer because that wouldn't work. Anyway, next year we're going to be doing, of course, 1945. And if you would like to give me any of your suggestions for that, you can email me at media@sandlib.org and give me those suggestions. We'll consider them. I would like to thank our technical producer, Danny. Take a bow, Danny. Okay. And so then, let's get started. Okay. Title of our program today is Operations Greif and Stösser. I will explain all of those. Now, if you read any of the description for this program, you may know a little bit about this. If you watched the movie Battle of the Bulge, you may know a little bit about this, but that, of course, is not the complete story. And we will start right now. This is going to be in two parts. We're going to cover Operation Greif first, and then Operation Stösser next. Greif is the German word for Griffin, which you saw this bird, the mythical Griffin, very powerful looking predatory bird. So Operation Greif, well, here we have an interesting picture. We have Otto Skorzeny on the left, and we have Hitler on the right. Skorzeny, about 6'5", towers over Hitler. Hitler is actually 5'9", so he wasn't as small as history paints him to be. But what happened in October 25th, Skorzeny gets a call, and he is to come to the Führer's headquarters in Rastenburg. And Hitler is going to give him an assignment because he has had other assignments before. We will talk about that. And pretty much paraphrasing, he says, Skorzeny, I want you to form a special operations unit, and I want you to use American equipment and American uniforms to win the war. Now, if that sounds a little odd and maybe not quite in keeping with the rules of war, we'll talk about that too later. So who was Otto Skorzeny, and why did Hitler pick him? Well, we have encountered him several times. Last year, when we were doing 1943, we covered the rescue of Mussolini from the Gran Sasso. That was Otto Skorzeny that went in there to the top mountaintop and rescued him. And I put down there, Mussolini flew with me, because obviously Otto Skorzeny was the star of this show, not Mussolini. And of course, as you remember, he actually endangered that mission by crawling into that Fiesler storage. The other thing, he went to Budapest, and he kidnapped the Hungarian regent Miklós Horthy's son and held him for ransom. And why did he do that? Because Hungary was about to switch sides and they were worried that the Russians were going to invade. So he kidnapped his son and made Hungary stay in the war on the side of Germany. Skorzeny was called the most dangerous man in Europe. And Hitler picked him because of his special talents in commando warfare. And what else did Hitler say? Hitler made a lot of really, really big promises. He was very good at that without really knowing what was behind them or what the substance was. He told Skorzeny, you're going to have all kinds of support. You're going to have artillery. You're going to have airplanes. You're going to have jet airplanes like the Me-262 you see on the right-hand side and all of these other great wonder weapons. The problem is Germany hadn't had air superiority in that part of the world for a long time, and it would be very hard to muster all of this to help Skorzeny out. So what was the objective of Operation Greif? Well, the way it was drawn up, the specific task, there's a specific task and there's an implied task. The specific task was to drive through and capture the bridges over the Meuse River. The commandos, they were to cause chaos and confusion behind the American lines. They were supposed to cut phone lines, change signs around, and misdirect any troops or regiments, send them in the wrong way, maybe even into an unmarked minefield. The implied task was they were supposed to coordinate their actions with the conventional forces that would be involved. Now, as you know, Battle of the Bulge on the German side was known as Wacht am Rhein or Watch on the Rhine, or later Herbstnebel, Autumn Mist. It would be also known as the Ardennes Offensive and the Battle of the Bulge. Well, our focus for this is going to be very, very narrow. We're just going to be focusing on these two operations. Of course, the Battle of the Bulge, much, much larger subject, which perhaps we will cover in the future. On October 25th, the German High Command sent out orders looking for suitable men who had a knowledge of English and especially the American dialect. Well, I put it in yellow. So much for secrecy. Secrecy was supposed to be the big, big deal here. And of course, the Allies discovered this. A Canadian unit in the end of November actually intercepted some of these communiques, and they sent them up the line in Allied headquarters, but the Allies did nothing. Why? Because there was a certain amount of complacency here by November and December 1944. They thought the Germans were all done. They were beaten. They were thrown back across the Rhine, and everybody was celebrating. We're going to be shipped out. We're going home maybe for Christmas, and the war will be done in 44. End the war in 44 was the slogan. They also assumed that those forces that were fortifying along the Rhine, they assumed that they were going to be held back across the Siegfried line for the impending Allied invasion that was coming of Germany. However, there was also intelligence about troops and equipment that were west of the Rhine. These reports were ignored, and they said those were just simply broken formations of divisions and regiments that had been thrown back all the way across central France. This, of course, is going to be a huge intelligence failure, probably the biggest one since Pearl Harbor. Here's a good picture. You're going to enjoy this. This was actually the plan. We're going to talk briefly about the Battle of the Bulge overview. The plan was for the German 6th Panzer Corps and 6th Panzer Army and the 5th Army to push through the Ardennes. Now, if you know, it is a very heavily forested area, and the Germans did go through there in 1940 with success. But listen, this is not 1940. This was a very big plan. It's a very big overreach. And as you see in the map, their strategic objective was going to be Antwerp. But in order to do that, they were going to have to push out, bulge that line. What they were going to do, they wanted to drive a wedge between the American 9th and 1st Army and the Patton's 3rd Army in the south. And I want you to look down there at that flag on the 3rd Army. You see that picture of Patton. licking his lips, because once there's a bulge like that, and you have to think of 1943, the Russian-German Battle of Kursk, where there was a giant bulge. Did the Germans learn anything from this? I'm not sure they did, because those German lines, even if they had gotten all the way to the Meuse River, which in this case they did not, there was going to be this large bulge, and George Patton was almost ready. He was chomping at the bit to go north and just chop right into that bulge. Now, I haven't read in the middle there about the decisive battle syndrome. Now, if you were getting a little bit from Operation Goodwood, which we covered, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the British were looking for a decisive battle to break out and go running across France. The Japanese at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, they was looking for that one big decisive battle that they were going to sink the entire American fleet, and they would have to sue for peace. This also is a decisive battle. Hitler was making a huge gamble. He was rolling the dice that this was going to work, but he was on a very, very thin thread. Why? Because a lot of the success of this operation was going to depend on time. Time was the killer. Speed, they could not fall behind on their timetable. Weather, of course, you know a little bit about the weather. December 1944 was an awful time for weather. The Germans were able to calculate this very, very well, because there was such bad weather at the time that sort of negated the Allies' air superiority, but that would only last for a short time. Fuel was a big problem. They only had so much fuel for one push, and if they did not stick to that timetable, their tanks were going to run out of gas. Okay, now Skorzeny, he's stuck here. He's got 5 weeks to prepare for this operation, and he was told that he's going to need this, and this. He asked for 15 tanks, 20 armored cars, 20 self-propelled guns, 100 jeeps. He asked for U.S. Army uniforms that were all going to be delivered to the training camp. But what they got a hodgepodge of all kinds of uniforms. They got POW uniforms that had a special marking on the back. They actually got Russian uniforms. They got uniforms from soldiers that had been killed or wounded. And that's it, really. The equipment fell really far short. They actually did get 2 Sherman tanks. Now remember, this was November 1944. The Germans were on the run. They were retreating, so they didn't have a lot of resources to collect captured equipment. They got 2 Shermans. They both broke down. They couldn't get parts. He asked for whatever he could get. So they sent him 5 Mark V Panther tanks and 6 armored cars. As far as the men who spoke English, he had only 10 that spoke perfect English and knew the American dialect. Some, 30 to 40, they had some knowledge of slang, but not a lot. The majority of them spoke English probably pretty well, that they could pass, but the majority of them spoke no English at all. They could say ja or nein in English, yes or no. They went through a lot of training in that brief period of time. They studied how to tap their cigarettes on the pack like American soldiers do. They practiced how they would ride in a Jeep. And they actually screwed up on this, because Skorzeny had them all ride in a Jeep with 4 men in each. And almost this never happened. There was never that many men in a Jeep. He asked originally for 3,300 men, and he only got 2,500. It was a mix of Luftwaffe, SS, regular Army, and Navy. And I said, talk about inter-service rivalry. The majority of these people already disliked each other. Now they're being all pushed together in this one unit. And the unit was going to be called Panzer Brigade 150. Skorzeny, he divided this into 3 Kampfgruppe or battle groups, one with 5 Panthers, 5 self-propelled guns, 3 companies of infantry, 2 Panzer Grenadier platoons, an anti-tank platoon, and Kampfgruppe Y was going to be the same as X, but with no Panthers. Kampfgruppe Z was going to be the same as X and Y, but with no Panthers. Now, how did they hope that they were going to fool anybody using Panthers. Well, this is interesting. This is actually a shot from a war game. These guys, a lot of them, they had a lot of fighting spirit, but again, they didn't have enough time for training. They didn't have enough time to familiarize themselves with the equipment they'd be using, and the planning was just all wrong. And the one unit that Skorzeny was putting all of his hope in was going to be called Einheit Stillau. Einheit meaning unit or grouping, and named after an SS commander, Stillau. This was going to be the creme de la creme. This was going to be the people that were going to do all of the heavy lifting and the sabotage, demolition. They would be, again, they were sent to POW camps to converse with POWs, to learn the American slang. They watched American movies. They were prepared the best they could in that time period. They were supposed to blow up ammunition dumps and fuel stores. They would go on to the Meuse River, and they were to make sure those bridges were intact so the panzers could get there. So when Field Marshal Model found out about this, and you know about him from Operation Market Garden, Field Marshal Model, when he heard about this operation, he said he gave it only a 10% chance of success. Now, why was this? We already went about this a little bit. Skorzeny, in fact, said we were already made aware that in some respects the men's training hadn't been all that it really should be. Can you see where this is all going? There was bad planning and almost no intelligence and reconnaissance of the Allied lines, other than figuring that there were some weak American units around Losheim and in that Ardennes area. Again, a hodgepodge of uniforms and equipment. Secrecy, well, that was pretty much blown out the window in the end of November. And they were supposed to get started in December, December 16. However, when they were training, again, they were trying to keep everything secret. People kept coming to Skorzeny saying, Commander, what is this mission? What are we going to be doing? And one guy came up and said, aha, we're going to be going to Paris to kidnap Eisenhower, right? And Skorzeny said nothing. He said nothing. He didn't want to squash any of the rumors, and he figured that those were going to leak out anyway, and the Allies would find out about it. The other things, they thought they were going to go all the way over to the coast of France and Lorient and relieve that garrison there, do things in Paris, get Eisenhower, relieve the garrison at Brest. The rumors were flying everywhere. Now, here's the interesting thing. What they did, and I showed you that tank in the beginning in our picture back there, they had to do with what they could. And this was what Skorzeny said. They had to improvise quite a lot. And what they did, they took the chassis of this Panther tank on the bottom there, and they took sheet metal and they welded it to the top of the turret to make it look like an M10 tank destroyer of the United States. Pretty good job on that. Not so great a job on some of the other things, like this right here. This was a Sturmgeschütz. This was the German self-propelled gun. Doesn't really look very much like anything the Americans had, yet they slapped some olive drab paint on them, and they put the stars on them. And Skorzeny was going to say that the only people that would be fooled by this would be very green troops at night, and this just was really not going to work. And this was they got German half tracks. You see the actual one on the bottom of your screen right there. This was the mock-up on the other side. And they would put the stars on there, hoping to fool everybody. And here's our start picture right here. On December 14th, Panzer Brigade 150 went up to its start positions, and on December 16th, they headed out. There was, I'll show you in a map in a second, the commando units were going to be behind the 1st SS Panzer, the 12th SS Panzer, and the 12th Volksgrenadier Division. The aim was they were going to be going behind them, sort of like all the way in the back of this column, and wait for those panzers to push through. And again, on the bottom there on our start screen, you saw that is the Panther tank there with the welded plates on it to make it look like an American tank. And you have the Sturmgeschütz behind that doesn't look anything like American. You have American Jeep behind that, and you have another mock-up behind that. The operation was doomed to failure. And why did this happen? Because traffic. And if you're on Sanibel, you know exactly what I mean. There was no breakthrough because the traffic snarled all of the roads. Again, it was bad weather. And again, remember I said time and speed was critical factors in this operation. Here's your picture right here. And this is what we were talking about. 12th SS Panzer was going to follow the A, B, and C route up to the River Meuse that you see there. The 1st SS Panzer was going to be on the D and E routes going all the way to the southern end there near Hue. However, and you see you see a parachute there. That is where Operation Stösser is going to happen, and we will talk about that a little bit. But you see some very, very familiar names there. You see Stavelot, you see Malmedy, which we'll talk about. Yeah, you see Losheim, Hohensfeld, and the Monschau, the Hohesven. Also, these are the areas where they were supposed to break through. Again, very, very ambitious. And of course, they didn't make it. So anyway, here's some pictures from the wonderful Osprey series of uniforms. And on the left, you see the disguised German soldier wearing an American outfit. You see Panzer commander, you see Panzer commanders on the right. And the guy on the furthest right, he's holding a Panzerfaust, which was their version of the RPG of today. Here's some German soldiers enjoying captured American rations and cigarettes. These guys on the right, they look pretty happy because they are, once again, they are moving forward and they're in the offensive. However, what did happen is, as you know, the Battle of the Bulge, there was a breakthrough, not a big one, but it was big enough to envelop several American regiments and a division. And there were many American soldiers that were captured, especially around Malmedy. But as I said, after the end of December, December 28th, beginning of January, these roles are going to be reversed. And here's some box art from some soldiers that I built. And again, it shows the Americans being captured by these two guys. These are SS soldiers here. And the vanguard of the 1st SS Panzer Division took a whole bunch of prisoners again on that first day. The conventional forces, they were gathering prisoners. It was very difficult for them because they were trying to obtain a breakthrough. They were trying to move forward as fast as they can, and they had to deal with these prisoners. The SS, however, they dealt with the prisoners in a different way. And as you can see down on the right-hand side, the Malmedy massacre, where 84 American soldiers were massacred in a snowy field. This, once they find out about this, is going to stiffen Allied resistance and make the Germans' job even harder. Okay, here's our pop quiz. Okay, and this is where I'm going to ask you to play along at home because I don't have you here to interact with you. So I'm going to have you have a piece of paper and a pencil, and you give me your answer on this. And remember, your life in 1944 would have depended on you answering these questions correctly. And you see that MP in the middle of the screen. He's got a Thompson submachine gun aimed right at your chest. And he's going to ask you some questions. He's going to ask you, who's Popeye's girlfriend? Danny, do you know? Okay. He's going to ask you, who won the 1940 World Series? Hurry up. Who won it? Who's Betty Grable's husband, Danny? Do you know? Okay. What's the capital of Illinois? How well are you doing so far? Here's the biggest part down there. If you answered all these correctly, here's your extra credit question. What does LSMFT mean? Okay, I'll give you a second to write that down because that's so pretty long. I guess you don't know, right? Okay, you ready to find out the answers? Here we go. Popeye's girlfriend is olive oil. The Cincinnati Reds won the 1940 World Series. The capital of Illinois is Springfield, not Chicago. And Harry James, the great trumpet player, was Betty Grable's husband. And LSMFT means Lucky Strike, means fine tobacco. And also on the ad, it says it's toasted, which I'm sure is a big plus. Anyway, well, some of this is pretty important too, because right here we have some guys, and you say, well, what do these guys have in common? Well, the actor David Niven, who is in the middle there, he was asked that very question at a checkpoint because he was a British liaison officer attached to an Allied headquarters, American headquarters. They asked him that question. Who won the 1940 World Series? He goes, I don't know. I made a picture with Ginger Rogers in 1938. Does that count? And they let him go, so I figured. And Omar Bradley, general there, he was asked the question, what's the capital of Illinois? He said, Springfield, right? And the soldier said, no, it's Chicago. We're holding you for a while. And the guy on the right-hand side, Bruce Clark, they asked him about the Chicago Cubs, the baseball team. They said, what league do they belong to? He goes, American League. Nope, sorry. They arrested him too and kept him for a couple days. And this is how it was. Even Bernard Montgomery was stopped several times because there was a rumor, another one of these rumors, that he was actually going to be kidnapped and killed. So they stopped him several times and put him in isolation. Oh, you're going to like this one. The special operations, you can't produce them on a shoestring. They have to be trained. They need time to practice. There was no time for a rehearsal. There was faulty planning, and of course, the unreasonable expectation that they were going to go all the way up to the River Meuse, and that was most likely going to fail. And of course, this is Hitler's baby. Hitler, by the December 1944, he's got no idea what's going on. He's moving little pieces around on a map saying this division here, that division there, when neither of those divisions even exist anymore. But here's the cool thing about this. This is actually a German King Tiger tank that was captured. Note the Allied, the American star is upside down, and that's not going to fool anybody. Now, this is a captured American Jeep. The German driver was killed. This was during probably the Battle of Malmedy. There was indeed a battle there. Skorzeny's PZ-150. By this time, they were making no progress at all. So he said, take off your American uniforms. You're going to fight as a conventional force, and they're going to fight around Malmedy. This is captured Wehrmacht soldiers. The guy on the right-hand side, he identifies one of those SS soldiers over there as people, one of the people that shot our guys around Malmedy, that massacre. This is some German prisoners, and two of them are from Skorzeny's outfit on the right-hand side. Here we go. This is an M10, or supposedly M10. It made an entry into a cafe near La Falaise. You see the armored plates that are attached to the turret. And as I said, this is probably their best job that they did at disguising their tanks. And it is almost believable. However, those distinctive road wheels, and if you've been a soldier on the Western Front there for a while, and you've gotten used to seeing Panther tanks at Normandy and Mortain and all the way across France, you've got to know what they look like. These are very distinctive cross-transmission road wheels, and gives away this Panther 5. However, also the cool thing, the drive sprocket, which is in the front there, you see the turret is turned around all the way in the back, and nobody really knew why this tank tried to drive into that building. Here's a couple more of the ersatz vehicles. Again, that's a Panther on the left-hand side. You see the star with the circle around it. That was knocked out. Again, as I say, after a while, they were on to these guys. They knew what they were doing, and they were able to spot these fakes from a long way off, especially that fake on the bottom picture right there, which is a German self-propelled gun. forget the stars. They knew exactly what that was with that pig snout barrel on the front of the armor there. So the confusion was so great that the German commando teams, they were sowing discord. They were redirecting troops. 3 of them were caught in a small Belgian village, and the one guy, Wilhelm Schmidt, he actually relayed that rumor that had been swirling around at their training camp that they were going to come after Eisenhower and maybe even his staff. And when the name Skorzeny was dropped, they all went nuts because they knew Skorzeny's reputation. They knew that he had rescued Mussolini, and Eisenhower was immediately put in lockdown. They locked him down. They wouldn't let him leave, and he spent his entire Christmas completely isolated. After several days, he says, "I don't care anymore. Let them kill me. I'm going to leave." But then they told him who was in charge of this, and he says, "Get Skorzeny." And posters went up all over Paris and the surrounding countryside with Skorzeny's face on it. However, Skorzeny's face is going to look a little bit different after the Battle of Normandy because a proximity fuse went off very close to him near a building and caused very serious injuries, even more so than the giant dueling scar he had on his face. Okay, a surprise pop quiz. You didn't know this was going to happen. This is an actor that played one of Skorzeny's commandos in the Battle of the Bulge. Now, you remember this movie. I want you to also remember that a lot of this movie was fictionalized too. A lot of it didn't happen. But this is Lieutenant Schumacher, as he was called in the movie. Can you name who this actor is? And he is the actor Ty Hardin. And here's the extra credit. You see our picture on the bottom there. Ty Hardin was in this movie as well with Cliff Robertson. And it is, of course, PT 109. And Hardin served as Kennedy's executive officer. You see what this is? Do you see this happening again? Now, I know this couldn't have been my wife because she doesn't know any German at all. So this has to be somebody else to put "Ich liebe dich, mein Schatz," or "I love you, my sweetheart." So I must have a secret girlfriend somewhere. Anyway, let's go on. In all of Skorzeny's commandos, 44 of them wearing U.S. uniforms got through the Allied lines. And all of them, believe it or not, but 8 of them were returned. Now, a lot of the different accounts, they give different numbers. One account says 18 were returned, and this says 8, with the last men being sent through the lines on December 19th. Again, Skorzeny, all piled up behind this giant roadblock. The element of surprise was gone, and they had to revert back to wearing their German uniforms. Although, while they were out there, while they were trying to fool everybody, they had developed some very elaborate recognition signals. Some of the soldiers wore a pink scarf or a blue scarf, and the tanks, as they couldn't fool anybody actually, they were to have their turrets in a 9 o'clock position. That way, any German soldiers that saw these mock-ups would know that they were friendly. However, there were still some friendly fire incidents. And again, the panic, that was probably the biggest part of this entire operation. The psychological warfare aspect of this was far, far greater than any military contributions that were made by these units. Here's an interesting picture right here. This is a village in the Hohenvenn region near Malmedy. This is actually on January 6th. The Germans, again, they're in full retreat, but they still have some of their captured equipment. They've got a Daimler armored car there, an American Jeep behind, an American Jeep behind that. Again, he called off the operation after day 2 because there was no strategic breakthrough. There was no breakthrough to the River Meuse, although some scattered units made it there. They couldn't hold. There was no way that they could have capitalized on that breakthrough. And this is what eventually is going to happen to those three SS commandos, Pernas, Schmidt, and Billing. They're about to be executed. I don't know if you've ever seen these pictures, but we're not going to dwell on these. And finally, PZ 150 was disbanded in January 23rd because by that time the unit had completely fallen apart. Here's our other half here. It's a little shorter than Operation Greif because actually it was also doomed to failure. This is Operation Stösser, or named after that bird on the bottom of the screen, an auk. Head of this was Friedrich August Freiherr von Haidt. Interesting name, say that 5 times fast. He has a very, very storied career in the Fallschirmjäger, or the paratroops. He led them in several different key aspects. Here's the thing also, we're talking about inner circles rivalries. Everybody hated the SS, including von der Haidt. He hated the SS in general, and Skorzeny in specific. Now, he's going to survive the war, believe it or not. After I tell you, you're going to be surprised. He survived the war, and he died in 1994. One of the things leading up, you see Sepp Dietrich on the right, who is in charge of the 6th Panzer Army. Von der Haidt went to him because he figured that communication just might be a problem on this operation. He asked for a pigeon unit, and Sepp Dietrich says, "Nein, Von der Haidt, you cannot have pigeons because I'm not running a zoo here." Stösser's specific task was to secure road junctions and critical bridges in preparation for those tanks that were supposed to relieve them. And as you know, paratroopers cannot fight for very long after they've landed. Their time is very short, and they need to be relieved very quickly. Think about Operation Market Garden up in Arnhem. If you don't get to those paratroopers in a reasonable amount of time, they're going to be wiped out. Now, here's another problem. The German paratroopers, they did not drop with their weapons. They did not drop with them. They were dropped in separate containers. Now, this is going to be a big problem because there was only a very few veterans, and even then they had not done a combat jump since Crete in 1944, and some had absolutely no jump training at all, and they're going to be jumping at night. And a lot of them thought it was just a training mission, so they weren't too upset about that. But von der Haidt, even before this operation began, had broken his arm in an automobile accident. What he did, he strapped his arm to the side and he jumped anyway. Now I'll give you, now maybe some of you who know a little bit about history know who the guy in the window is there. And I just used him because he is an example of how the German paratroopers jumped. They jumped out of the plane. They did not use a static line that pulled their ripcord for them. They jumped out free fall like this, and then they would pull their ripcord after a while. That is, of course, the famous boxer, Max Schmeling. What's that thing on the bottom? An Essen bomb. Well, once the paratroopers were on the ground, of course, they needed to be resupplied. They were running out of ammunition and food very quickly. So the Germans came over with what few Ju-52s they had left, and they dropped containers full of food. Well, guess what? Those Essen bomb or food bombs ended up going into the Allied lines. Well, anyway, they were able to scare up 100 or so Ju-52s. The pilots were mostly inexperienced. Again, remember, this is December 1944, and the best of the best either had been killed or captured. It was their only nighttime drop, and they had 1,300 paratroopers. Well, what happened? When you have inexperienced pilots who don't know what they're doing and think they're on a training mission, dropping at night, all these things are going to pile up, and the pilots dropped their troops behind German lines all the way back almost to the city of Bonn. Only a few hundred of them were anywhere near the American lines, and then only a very, very few actually landed in their drop zone. Well, here's some good, interesting pictures right here. Here's some German paratroopers in the middle that did manage to capture some American soldiers, and they're examining a Thompson submachine gun, 45 caliber. And this is what the paratroopers look like, their winter uniform that they jumped with. They fought a bunch of very small actions. Of course, they never had more than maybe 20, 30, or 50 people that they were able to gather together. And of course, it's going to be an absolute bloodbath. And only 150 of them, after von der Heyd told them that they could escape and leave and go back to their lines, only 150 made it back. The rest were killed, captured, or missing. And later, von der Heyd called it Operation Mass Murder. Also, all the radios had been lost or destroyed in the jump. However, he didn't know that that traffic jam was bottling up all the tanks, and they were fighting, trying to survive, waiting to be relieved. They were cut off, and von der Heyd, he ordered his men to go back through and try to reach the German lines as best he could. He hobbled into Monschau. He'd been wounded in the leg. They were cold, hungry, they were starving, and he surrendered on December 23rd. And he was held prisoner in England until 1947. I put this one in here so you could actually see what a Panther tank looked like. You see the Panther tanks on the left-hand side, and you see their mock-up on the bottom. Again, not really that bad of a job. That was probably the best job they did at simulating an American tank. However, not so lucky is this Ju-52 during Operation Stoesser that crashed, killing most of the crew and the paratroopers inside. This is the Stars and Stripes from after that, where, again, George Patton, he's going to come up from the south and just cut that bulge to ribbons. And the American paratroopers who were in Bastogne, they said, Patton, who was saying that he relieved them and came to the rescue, they said, we didn't need rescuing. But anyway, Patton drills right into that bulge, the small bulge that the Germans had created. And you see, there's a picture of a German paratrooper there that was captured during Operation Stösser, and some of the equipment that was also captured. Okay, did Operation Greif achieve its goals? No, as you probably could surmise from what I told you. The problems of this operation were just too great. They were magnified by the faulty command structure in the first place, the training, no planning, no training. So both missions were going to be really, really doomed from the start. The psychological war effect, as I said, both of those, Greif and Stösser, far, far outweighed any kind of military results. Even if both had been successful, there would have been really, really no reasonable outcome to that. However, the Psy-War effect is also called a combat multiplier because large numbers of American troops were used in trying to hunt these paratroopers down because they didn't know where they were. And they were tying down several very, very large units. And what was the cost overall? Well, as I told you about the commandos, most of those guys did get back, believe it or not, but most of the paratroopers in Operation Stösser were killed, wounded, or captured. Overall, the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans lost 20 divisions with 24,000 men killed, 63,000 wounded, and 16,000 captured. This did nothing to help their case. It weakened what strength and troops they had on the Siegfried Line, and it probably ended up hastening the end of the war. And you see Skorzeny up there on the right-hand side, sitting at his desk after he had been captured. He actually spent 1945, the first part of it, in command of troops. He was at the Remagen Bridge. Probably not many of you know that. He took a very severe wound to the face during the fighting around Malmedy. He was arrested in May 15th. He was put on trial in 1947, and he used the ruse de guerre defense. Now, if you know anything about that, the Hague Convention of 1907, several articles were said what you can do as a ruse during war, what was permitted, what wasn't permitted. And the big question was whether Skorzeny violated these rules of war by putting soldiers into enemy uniforms. Well, he always held by the defense that he said once they went into combat, they took those uniforms off. He was almost going to be not acquitted. He was going to be convicted when they dug up a special operations British officer and said, hey, we did this too. So Skorzeny is acquitted. He escapes from prison in 1948 and stays in various places in Bavaria and Paris. And in 1948, he is recruited by the spy master Galen because Skorzeny had special skills in commando operations. He was a military advisor in Egypt and Argentina. You probably could expect that in 1952. And that picture down there, I have no clue who that guy on the right is, but on the left is Skorzeny. The guy in the middle is Juan Perón. This is the thing where it really starts getting funny. He was allegedly recruited by the Mossad, which is the Israeli intelligence service. What? For what? Why would they recruit this guy? Well, again, he had an inside circle in a lot of the goings on after the war where convicted in absentia soldiers were being shuttled into different countries, and the Israelis wanted them so they could put them on trial. His other activities, he lived in Ireland for a while. He was a farmer in Ireland. But then in 1975, he contracted cancer and he died. And he is buried in downtown Vienna. And that's the end of our show for today. I was asked last time to put up some recommended reading. These are all the sources that I used in putting together this program. Some of the very best ones is the one right there in the middle, if you can get it. German Special Operations in the 1944 Ardennes Offensive. Time for Trumpets, good. Commando, okay. Guns at Last Light, an excellent source. Book written by Skorzeny himself, Skorzeny's Secret Missions, Ardennes, 1944, by another well-known historian, Anthony Beevor, and Count Group Piper, which is part of the Stackpole Military Library. And I want to thank you very much for joining me today, and I want to see you back here on April 1st. Thanks.